A black man stands quietly in a city park, taking in the rare moment of calm and freedom in a world that rarely grants him either. The fresh air and the open space feel like an escape from the pressures and assumptions that seem to surround him wherever he goes. But his sense of peace is shattered in seconds. A uniformed figure approaches, his face stern, his eyes narrowing as he closes in. The man notices, bracing himself. He's done nothing wrong, and he knows that, but in his world, innocence isn't enough. "Hey! What are you doing here?" The officer's voice is sharp, loud, echoing across the open space. People nearby stop and watch, curious and wary. "Just enjoying the park," he replies, trying to keep his tone neutral, calm. But the officer scoffs, looking him up and down with an expression that reeks of judgment. "Enjoying the park," the officer mocks, a sneer curling his lips. "You think this place is for you?" The man feels the heat rising in his face, the words hitting him like blows. He's been here before, this feeling of being judged, questioned, made to feel as if he doesn't belong. But there's no one to turn to, no voice to back him up in this moment of silent humiliation. "Show me some ID," the officer snaps, his tone cold, dismissive. The man tries to explain, tries to defuse the situation, but the officer cuts him off each time. "Save it. I don't want your excuses. You look like trouble, and people like you don't belong here." The officer's words sting, burning into him with a familiar cruelty that's almost worse than physical pain. As he reaches for his ID, his hands are steady, but inside, he feels a storm brewing. He knows exactly what this is. It's not about safety or protocol. It's about something darker, something that's poisoned his life in countless ways over the years. And yet, he's expected to stand there, endure it, to accept the insults thrown his way without flinching. "Tell me, how'd you get out here anyway?" the officer continues, circling him like a predator sizing up its prey. "Bet you don't even live around here, do you?" "Let me guess, looking for trouble." The man clenches his fists but forces himself to release the tension, his voice low as he answers, "I don't have to answer that." His tone is calm, but his words carry a quiet defiance, a refusal to bow completely. "Oh, so you think you can talk back to me now?" The officer's face contorts, a twisted satisfaction flickering in his eyes as he leans in closer. "You've got some nerve thinking you're safe out here, that you could come and walk around like everyone else." A small crowd gathers, murmurs of discomfort filling the air. Strangers exchange glances, some sympathetic, others apprehensive. Yet, no one steps forward. They watch as if this is just another spectacle, something to shake their heads at and walk away from. The man swallows hard, feeling the stares burning into his skin, feeling the weight of the silence from the onlookers. He knows that no one here will stand up for him, that no one will challenge the officer's authority. And with each second that passes, the feeling of isolation grows, feeding his anger, his frustration. "Look at you," the officer sneers, his tone dripping with contempt. "Thinking you're just like everyone else. You don't belong here, and you know it." Those words cut deep, tearing at a wound he spent a lifetime trying to heal. His hands clench again, tighter this time. The urge to defend himself, to shout, to fight back, burns within him. But he knows how this ends if he resists. One wrong move, one word out of place, and this could escalate beyond words. So, he stands there, swallowing his pride, forced to endure the officer's unfiltered prejudice. Finally, the officer steps back, looking him over one last time with a smirk. "Go on," he says, waving a dismissive hand. "You've had enough of a reminder for today. Just remember, you don't belong here." As he walks away, humiliation and anger pulse through him, clashing within his chest. He's exhausted, beaten down by an experience that he's endured too many times before. But this time, something shifts. A spark ignites, a quiet, steady flame of resolve. He won't let this moment define him, won't let the hatred of one man shape his future. He won't be silenced or diminished. A few days later, fate intervenes in a way no one could predict. The same officer, the man who sneered and humiliated him, finds himself in a situation of life and death. His car, veering off a slippery road in a rainstorm, crashes into a barrier, smoke billowing, flames licking up the hood. People gather, watching in shock, but frozen, unsure of what to do. And then, through the haze of smoke and chaos, a familiar figure steps forward. The man he humiliated in the park, the one he demeaned and insulted, is now his only hope. Without hesitation, the black man charges towards the wreckage, his actions driven by something far more powerful than revenge or anger. With strength and determination, he pulls the officer from the burning car, risking his own safety to save the life of a man who saw him as less than human. As the flames rise and the scene draws a crowd, people murmur, pointing and whispering. The irony isn't lost on them. The man who was belittled now stands as a hero, his courage undeniable. But this act of bravery sparks something unexpected, something that neither of them saw coming. What happens next shocks everyone involved. The community, watching this story unfold, begins to question, to wonder about the limits of prejudice and the true meaning of compassion. Will this officer, once filled with disdain, see the error of his ways? Will he confront his prejudice and change, or will he let his pride continue to consume him? This act of heroism stirs the town, shifting perspectives, and leaves an unforgettable impact on all who witness it. And as people watch, they are left with a question that will linger long after the flames have died down. Will this moment change everything? Or is it just the beginning of something far deeper? Stay tuned to find out how one powerful act of courage can shatter prejudice, turn the tide, and change lives forever. Hey there, thanks for tuning in. Here at Plough of Twist, we believe in equality and stand firmly against any form of racism or discrimination. This story sheds light on the strength and resilience found within moments of injustice, showing just how powerful the human spirit can be. Remember, every voice matters, and together, we're stronger. Enjoy the story, and if you like what we're doing, don't forget to subscribe for more impactful narratives. The sun was just beginning to rise over the city of Baltimore, casting a soft glow across the quiet streets as Desmond Banks locked his apartment door and headed out for his early morning walk. He liked to take these walks before the city fully came alive, savoring the cool, crisp air and the solitude. For Desmond, these early hours were a refuge, a time to gather his thoughts and find some peace before the day's demands began pressing in. At 35, Desmond had grown accustomed to the weight of responsibility on his shoulders. He was a single father to an energetic 7-year-old, Jaden, who meant everything to him. Desmond's life revolved around ensuring his son had opportunities he himself never did. Raised by his grandmother in a small house on the edge of town, Desmond hadn't had much growing up, but his grandmother's love was steadfast and unwavering. She had instilled in him values of resilience, humility, and hard work. He had taken on those values, striving to live a life that honored her sacrifices, a life of dignity and kindness. He worked as a mechanic at a local garage, taking pride in his job, finding satisfaction in fixing things, making them whole again. The pay wasn't great, but it kept the lights on, kept food on the table, and allowed him to take care of Jaden. Desmond's life was simple, but it was his, and he found a sense of peace in knowing he was doing his best for his son. But Baltimore was a city of contradictions, a place where opportunity and hardship collided. It was a city of booming development in some parts, while others were left struggling, clinging to what little they had. Desmond had seen it all, the glimmering downtown areas where he worked and the dilapidated streets of his neighborhood. He had come to accept this reality, though, making peace with it as best as he could. He was a black man in a city that held complicated, often hostile, perceptions of him. It wasn't uncommon for him to experience subtle slights or outright hostility, things that he brushed off with quiet resilience. Desmond's routine was usually uninterrupted, but this particular morning, as he made his way through Patterson Park, he saw a figure in a police uniform standing by the fountain, arms crossed, watching him closely. Desmond recognized the officer immediately. Officer Cole Ramsey. Ramsey was notorious in the neighborhood, known for his harsh demeanor and the way he seemed to enjoy asserting his authority over people, especially over people who looked like Desmond. His reputation wasn't based on rumors alone. Desmond had seen Ramsey in action a few times, always suspicious, always quick to accuse, and never willing to listen. He was the kind of officer who saw people like Desmond as suspects before anything else. Desmond considered changing his route, avoiding Ramsey's gaze, but he decided against it. This was his park as much as anyone else's, and he had every right to be there. As he approached, he kept his eyes forward, hoping to pass by without incident. But that hope was quickly dashed. "Hey! Where do you think you're going?" Ramsey's voice cut through the morning stillness, loud and sharp. Desmond stopped, his heart sinking. He turned, meeting Ramsey's cold stare. "I'm just out for a walk," Desmond replied, keeping his voice steady, controlled. He knew better than to show any emotion that could be twisted or misinterpreted. Ramsey took a step closer, looking him up and down with a smirk. "Funny. I didn't know they let just anyone stroll around here before dawn," he said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. Desmond felt his pulse quicken, but he held his ground. He didn't want any trouble, but he also wasn't about to let this man belittle him. "It's a public park," he replied, keeping his tone respectful but firm. "I'm not doing anything wrong." Ramsey laughed, a harsh sound that echoed in the stillness of the morning. "Not doing anything wrong, huh? Isn't that what they all say?" His words were laden with contempt, his gaze hard and unrelenting. Desmond felt the weight of Ramsey's stare, the way it bore into him as if he was trying to find a reason, any reason, to escalate the situation. Desmond had been in these kinds of situations before, had learned to navigate them with as much calm as he could muster. But Ramsey seemed intent on making this encounter as uncomfortable as possible. "What's your name?" Ramsey demanded, crossing his arms over his chest, his stance intimidating. Desmond hesitated. He knew he had the right to refuse, but he also knew that refusal could make things worse. "Desmond Banks," he said quietly, keeping his voice low. He saw Ramsey's smirk deepen, a glint of satisfaction in his eyes. "Well, Desmond, I don't know what you think you're doing out here at this hour, but I'd suggest you move along," Ramsey said, his tone dripping with condescension. "This isn't the kind of place for someone like you." Desmond's jaw tightened, but he forced himself to stay calm. "Someone like me," he repeated, his voice barely a whisper, his words laced with a quiet dignity that Ramsey either didn't hear or didn't care to acknowledge. Ramsey leaned in closer, his gaze challenging, daring Desmond to speak up. "Yeah," he replied, his voice a low hiss. "Someone like you. I know your type. Always lurking around where you're not wanted. Looking for trouble." The words stung, each one like a slap, and Desmond felt his hands clench into fists at his sides. But he knew better than to react. He knew that Ramsey was looking for a reason to escalate, to turn this into something more than it was. And Desmond wouldn't give him that satisfaction. He swallowed hard, forcing himself to breathe, to stay composed, even as the humiliation burned within him. "Now, I'll say it again," Ramsey continued, his tone mocking, dripping with disdain. "Move along. Before I have to make you." Desmond held Ramsey's gaze for a long moment, feeling the anger simmer within him, the frustration of years of encounters like this, of always being seen as less than, of having to justify his own existence in places he had every right to be. But he wouldn't let Ramsey have this power over him. With a slow, controlled nod, he turned, walking away with his head held high, refusing to give Ramsey the reaction he was looking for. As he walked, he felt the sting of Ramsey's words, felt them settle like a weight on his shoulders. He had tried so hard to shield Jaden from this part of the world, to give him a life where he could grow up without feeling like an outsider in his own city. But moments like this reminded him of the harsh reality, the world that he couldn't entirely protect his son from. And that realization hurt more than anything Ramsey could have said. By the time he reached his apartment, the anger had faded, replaced by a familiar weariness, a quiet resolve. He couldn't change the way people like Ramsey saw him, but he could control how he responded. He could show Jaden that strength wasn't about fighting every battle, but about knowing which ones to walk away from. Days passed, and Desmond tried to put the encounter behind him. He focused on his work, on taking care of Jaden, on building a life that was grounded in dignity and resilience. He taught his son about kindness, about standing up for what was right, about being strong in the face of adversity. And though the pain of Ramsey's words lingered, he tried not to let it shape him. Then, one evening, as Desmond was closing up the garage, he heard sirens in the distance. He didn't think much of it at first, but then he saw a plume of smoke rising from the road just beyond the shop. Something compelled him to go outside, to see what was happening. As he approached, he saw the wreckage, a car, twisted and mangled, smoke pouring from the engine, flames licking up the sides. And then, through the haze, he saw a familiar face behind the shattered windshield. Officer Ramsey, trapped, injured, his face pale with terror. Desmond felt a rush of conflicting emotions, anger, justice, a desire to walk away and let fate take its course. But another part of him, a part that had been shaped by his grandmother's teachings, by the values he held dear, pushed him forward. Without a second thought, he ran toward the car, his hands reaching for the door as the flames grew. In that moment, he wasn't thinking about Ramsey's words, his actions, the humiliation. All he could think about was saving a life. And as he pulled Ramsey from the wreckage, he knew that this act of compassion, this moment of courage, would change things in ways he couldn't yet foresee. The days following the accident cast a strange atmosphere over Desmond's life. Every part of him was haunted by the image of Officer Ramsey's face in that wreckage, the look of terror as flames crept up around him. And each time, he relived the moment he'd reached into the car and pulled Ramsey to safety. Saving the very man who had humiliated him just days before should have filled Desmond with a sense of vindication, moment of silent justice, maybe even triumph. But instead, all he felt was a mixture of confusion and unease. The act itself, the decision to run toward the danger instead of away from it, hadn't been a choice so much as an instinct. He'd simply done what he knew was right, guided by his own principles, not by Ramsey's actions or words. Still, the irony of it lingered like a storm cloud, heavy with questions he wasn't sure he wanted answered. What would this mean, if anything, between them? And even more unsettling, what would he have to face when Ramsey recovered? One afternoon, a few days after the incident, Desmond was at work in the garage, finishing up a repair on an old truck. He was alone, his mind drifting back to that fateful night, when the sound of the bell above the door startled him. He turned, wiping his hands on a rag, and there, to his disbelief, was Officer Cole Ramsey. His arm was in a sling, a bandage peeking from under his shirt collar, his face pale and still marked with fading bruises. For a moment, they stood in silence, the hum of machinery and the faint sounds of traffic outside filling the gap. Desmond's throat tightened. He had no idea what Ramsey wanted, why he was here, or what he could possibly say. Ramsey cleared his throat, his gaze unsteady. Desmond. Banks, right? He began, his voice softer, lacking the authority and edge it usually carried. Desmond nodded slowly, watching him carefully. That's right. What can I do for you? His tone was guarded, cautious, yet unspoken curiosity lingered underneath. Ramsey shifted uncomfortably, looking around the garage as if the walls themselves held answers he didn't have. I just wanted to come by and, thank you. He swallowed, the words seeming foreign in his mouth. You didn't have to do what you did. Most people wouldn't have. Desmond met his gaze, his expression unreadable. You're right. Most people wouldn't, he replied, his voice steady, almost cold. But I'm not most people. Ramsey winced, perhaps at the truth in Desmond's words, or maybe at the reminder of his own actions just days before. He nodded, looking down at the floor, searching for something else to say. Listen, I know I was out of line the other day. It's not the first time, and it probably won't be the last. He let out a bitter laugh, one that held a hint of self-loathing. Desmond's jaw tightened, his patience waning. If you're looking for me to tell you it's okay, that I forgive you, I'm not sure you're gonna get that. Ramsey looked up, a flash of frustration crossing his face. I'm not here for forgiveness, he replied, his voice taut. I just wanted you to know that what you did, saving me, it meant something. Desmond's eyes narrowed, sensing something beneath Ramsey's words that he couldn't quite place. Why does it mean something to you now, Ramsey? Because you got hurt? Because you realized you're not invincible? Ramsey's face flushed, his jaw clenching, but he didn't respond right away. After a long pause, he finally answered, his voice barely a whisper. Maybe it's because I realized that not everyone sees people like me the way I saw you. The words hit Desmond harder than he expected, a raw honesty that he hadn't anticipated. For the first time, Ramsey looked vulnerable, human. But even so, Desmond felt no satisfaction, no relief. He had given Ramsey a second chance at life, but he wasn't sure if he could give him a second chance at forgiveness. Look, Ramsey, he said, his tone soft but unyielding, saving you wasn't about you. It was about me, about doing what I know is right. You can take from it whatever you want, but don't think for a second that it erases what you did. Ramsey nodded slowly, absorbing Desmond's words with a quiet acceptance. He looked as if he wanted to say something more, to bridge the divide between them, but instead, he simply nodded. Thank you, he said again, his voice barely audible before he turned and walked out of the garage, leaving Desmond alone with the quiet hum of machinery. Desmond watched him go, a mix of relief and unease settling in his chest. This wasn't over. He could feel it. The encounter hadn't brought any resolution, only more questions. What would it take to break the cycle of prejudice and pain? And was it even worth trying, knowing how deep those wounds went? Days passed, and life resumed its usual rhythm. Desmond went to work, picked up Jaden from school, and tried to focus on the future he was building for them. But Ramsey's face haunted him, the look of vulnerability in something else, guilt, maybe, or shame, that Desmond couldn't shake. He found himself questioning whether it was possible for someone like Ramsey to change, to see beyond the narrow view he'd held for so long. One evening, as Desmond and Jaden sat down for dinner, a knock at the door startled them. Desmond wasn't expecting anyone, and visitors were rare. He opened the door, surprised to find a young man standing there, his face unfamiliar but somehow connected to a memory he couldn't quite place. Are you Desmond Banks? The man asked, his voice nervous but respectful. Desmond nodded, curiosity piqued. Yes. Can I help you? The man shifted uncomfortably, glancing over his shoulder before looking back at Desmond. I'm Cole Ramsey's son. He told me about what happened, about how you saved him. Desmond's heart skipped a beat. Ramsey had a son. He hadn't known, hadn't even considered it. For a moment, he was silent, processing the weight of this unexpected connection. Come in, he said finally, stepping aside to let the young man into the small apartment. They sat at the kitchen table, Jaden watching curiously from the other room. Desmond felt a strange sense of déjà vu, like he was being pulled back into a story he thought he'd left behind. I don't know what to say, Ramsey's son began, his voice trembling slightly. My dad, he's not the easiest person to understand. But he told me about what you did, and he wanted me to come here, to thank you. Desmond felt a wave of conflicting emotions. He didn't know whether to feel proud, angry, or resigned. Your dad has a lot to think about, he replied carefully, watching the young man's face. What happened between us, it wasn't just about that night. It's bigger than that. Ramsey's son nodded, his gaze intense, determined. I know. And I know he's done things that are hard to forgive. But, he's my dad. I just want to believe that he can be better. Desmond felt a pang in his chest, a flicker of understanding. He looked at his own son, Jaden, and felt the weight of that same hope, the hope that the world could be better, kinder, that people could change, if not for themselves, then for those they loved. As they talked, Desmond found himself telling Ramsey's son about his own life, about Jaden, about the struggles he'd faced, the injustices he'd endured. The young man listened intently, his face thoughtful, his silence respectful. When he finally left, Desmond felt a strange sense of peace, a quiet hope that maybe, just maybe, there was a way forward. But that peace was short-lived. A few days later, Desmond was walking through Patterson Park with Jaden when he saw a group gathered near the fountain. Ramsey stood among them, his posture rigid, his face unreadable. Desmond hesitated, sensing something tense, something unresolved in the air. He could feel the weight of countless eyes on him, could feel the anticipation building like a storm on the horizon. Ramsey saw him approach, his gaze locked onto Desmond's with a look that held both challenge and something else, regret, maybe, or a kind of quiet desperation. He took a deep breath, stepping forward as if preparing to confront a truth he could no longer avoid. The crowd fell silent, watching, waiting. Desmond felt his own heart race, the tension between them crackling in the air like a live wire. This was the moment, the confrontation they had both been avoiding, the one that would either tear them apart or forge a fragile understanding. The past, the pain, the injustice, all of it was here, tangible, undeniable. And as Ramsey began to speak, his voice low, trembling with unspoken emotion, Desmond felt the world shift around them, felt the weight of everything they'd both carried pressing down. This wasn't an apology or a confession. It was something deeper, something that could either heal or destroy. The words hung between them, heavy with meaning, and Desmond felt the urge to step forward, to say something that could change the course of their lives forever. But before he could speak, the tension shattered with a single, unexpected question, one that would leave everyone there, himself included, reeling with shock and disbelief. The air around the fountain in Patterson Park felt charged, thick with a tension that was almost tangible. Desmond could feel it, the weight of all eyes on him and Ramsey. The small crowd around them had fallen silent, their curiosity in anticipation palpable. He looked into Ramsey's eyes, searching for any hint of the man he had seen in the burning car. But Ramsey's expression was unreadable, his face set in a stern mask that seemed to reflect both pride and something far more complex, something almost like fear. Ramsey cleared his throat, his eyes locked onto Desmond's, and for a brief moment, his gaze faltered, flickering downwards as though he couldn't quite hold the weight of what he was about to say. Finally, he spoke, his voice carrying a note of hesitation that Desmond had never heard from him before. "I wanted to say. I know that what I did back there, in the park, it was wrong," Ramsey began, his voice low, barely above a whisper, yet filled with an unfamiliar rawness. "I've done a lot of things that, well, things I'm not proud of." Desmond kept his expression neutral, though his heart pounded with a mixture of resentment and curiosity. He crossed his arms, waiting for Ramsey to continue, wondering if this was just another empty gesture. Ramsey's gaze flicked to the ground, and he took a deep breath, as if searching for words that seemed reluctant to leave his mouth. I thought people like you, people I didn't understand. I thought I had you all figured out. But after that night, after what you did, I can't stop asking myself why. Why you would do that, for me." Desmond could feel the eyes of the crowd on him, their attention focused, waiting. He wanted to say something sharp, something that would show Ramsey that his actions hadn't been forgotten, hadn't been forgiven. But as he stood there, looking at the brokenness in Ramsey's expression, he found himself hesitating. "Why did I do it?" Desmond repeated, his voice calm but carrying a depth that silenced the murmurs around them. "Because that's who I am, Ramsey. I don't let hate define me. I don't let fear control me. You might think you know people like me, but you don't know me. You've never taken the time to know anything beyond what you assume." Ramsey's face twitched, a slight grimace crossing his features. Desmond noticed a flicker of regret, a kind of vulnerability that made him seem smaller, almost fragile in a way that contradicted the man he had known before. Ramsey took a step closer, his hands trembling slightly. Maybe I was wrong. Maybe I have been wrong, about a lot of things. Desmond felt a surge of conflicting emotions rise within him. He had waited years, endured countless moments of disrespect and belittlement, for someone like Ramsey to admit they were wrong. But now, as he looked at the man before him, he felt the victory slip through his fingers, leaving him with only a strange sense of emptiness. "Ramsey," he said slowly, each word heavy with meaning, "you can't just say you were wrong and expect things to be fine. Words don't erase the damage you've done." Ramsey's jaw tightened, and he nodded, as though he had expected this answer. "I know that," he replied quietly. I don't know where to start. I've built my whole life on these beliefs, these assumptions, and now," his voice trailed off, his words failing him. Desmond took a deep breath, fighting to maintain his composure. "It's not about where you start, Ramsey. It's about what you do moving forward. If you're serious about changing, then you have to live with the consequences of your past actions." The crowd around them seemed to hold its breath, watching the exchange unfold like a silent movie. Desmond felt the tension in the air grow thicker, as if the world itself was waiting for what Ramsey would say next. "I want to try," Ramsey said, his voice barely audible, his tone laced with something close to desperation. "I don't expect you to believe me, but I want to try. I need to make things right, somehow. Not just with you, but with everyone I've hurt." Desmond shook his head, his face a mixture of sadness and frustration. "You think you can make things right just like that? That one conversation, one apology, can undo years of hate and anger?" His voice was low, the words slipping out like a bitter confession. Ramsey looked at him, and for the first time, Desmond saw something real in his eyes, a raw, unfiltered grief that seemed to go beyond words. "I don't know what else to do," he whispered. "I've lost everything I thought I knew. I've lost myself." Desmond's heart clenched, and he struggled to reconcile the man he had despised with the broken figure standing before him. He wanted to tell Ramsey that it was too late, that no amount of remorse could erase the years of pain and humiliation. But something held him back, a strange sense of compassion that he didn't fully understand. "Maybe that's the price you pay," Desmond said finally, his voice steady but carrying a hint of softness. "Maybe losing yourself is what it takes to see what you've done to others." Ramsey's eyes met Desmond's, and in that moment, a quiet understanding passed between them, a fragile truce built on shared pain and regret. Desmond knew that Ramsey's journey was just beginning, that he had a long road ahead of him, one filled with challenges and moments of doubt. But he also knew that, for the first time, Ramsey was truly listening, truly seeing. The crowd around them began to disperse, sensing that the conversation had come to an end, leaving Desmond and Ramsey alone by the fountain. The silence between them was heavy, but it was a silence that held a glimmer of hope, a chance for redemption, not only for Ramsey but for a community that had been torn apart by prejudice and fear. Desmond turned to leave, his heart pounding with a mixture of relief and exhaustion. But as he walked away, he heard Ramsey's voice, soft and filled with a vulnerability that was almost childlike. "Desmond, thank you," he said, his words laced with sincerity. "Thank you for giving me a second chance." Desmond paused, his back still turned, and nodded, a small smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. He didn't say anything in return, but in that moment, he knew that something had shifted, a tiny crack in the wall that had divided them, a chance for healing that neither of them had expected. And as he walked away, he felt a strange sense of peace, a feeling that maybe, just maybe, change was possible, even in the most unlikely of places. The park was nearly empty now, with only a few people lingering around as the sun dipped low in the sky, casting an orange glow over the trees. Desmond thought that his conversation with Ramsey had ended, that whatever needed to be said had been spoken. But as he turned to leave, he felt Ramsey's hand reach out and grip his shoulder. Desmond stiffened, unsure of what to expect, but he turned to face him, his eyes guarded. "Wait," Ramsey said, his voice trembling slightly. He dropped his hand, realizing his touch had been uninvited, but his expression was intense, desperate. I know this isn't enough. Words aren't enough. But there's something else I need to say. Something I should have said a long time ago." Desmond remained silent, his gaze steady, waiting for Ramsey to continue. He didn't trust himself to speak yet, there was too much raw emotion simmering just below the surface. Ramsey took a deep breath, glancing down at his hands, which were clasped tightly in front of him, as if holding on to some fragile part of himself. "I grew up with a father who, let's just say he wasn't a good man. He hated people he didn't understand, and he taught me to hate them too. I was raised to believe that I was better, that anyone who looked like you was less. I carried that with me all my life, never questioning it, never even thinking about the damage it caused. I didn't see people. I just saw threats." Desmond's face remained impassive, though inside he felt a flicker of something unexpected, pity, perhaps, or a small, reluctant understanding. He knew what it was to be shaped by one's upbringing, by forces that seemed unmovable, unchangeable. But that didn't excuse Ramsey's actions. It couldn't. "That's not an excuse, Ramsey," Desmond said, his voice low but firm. "Whatever your father taught you, whatever you believed, none of that justifies the way you treated people. You chose to hold on to that hate. You chose to act on it." Ramsey nodded, swallowing hard, his gaze locked on Desmond's, as if he was afraid to look away, afraid of losing the connection they just barely started to build. "You're right," he admitted, his voice almost a whisper. "It was my choice. I chose to carry that hate, to let it define me. And for a long time, I didn't care who it hurt. I thought that was strength. But now, all I feel is shame." Desmond watched him, his eyes narrowing slightly. "What do you expect me to do with that, Ramsey?" he asked, his voice carrying a slight edge. "You come here, you say these things, but what do you want from me? Forgiveness? Redemption? Do you really think it's that simple?" Ramsey's shoulders slumped, and he shook his head slowly, his expression filled with a kind of resignation that Desmond hadn't seen before. "No, I don't expect anything. I know that whatever I've done, it can't be undone. But I just needed you to know. I needed you to hear it from me, even if it changes nothing." Desmond took a deep breath, processing Ramsey's words, feeling the weight of them settle heavily in his chest. There was a part of him that wanted to walk away, to leave Ramsey standing there, to let him sit in his own guilt. But another part of him, a quieter, more compassionate part, felt the tiniest flicker of understanding, or recognition of the courage it took for Ramsey to even admit these things. "You want to make things right?" Desmond asked, his tone softer but still firm. "Then prove it. Not with words, but with actions. Show the people you've hurt, the people you've looked down on, that you're willing to change. That's the only way any of this will mean anything." Ramsey looked up, his eyes filled with a mixture of relief and determination. "I will," he said, his voice steady. "I don't know how yet, but I will." They stood in silence for a moment, the tension between them easing slightly, replaced by a fragile understanding. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, maybe not ever, but it was something. A first step, perhaps, in a journey that neither of them fully understood. As they started to part ways, Ramsey hesitated, glancing over at Desmond one last time. "Can I ask you something?" he said, his voice tentative. Desmond raised an eyebrow, nodding for him to go on. Why did you save me that night?" Ramsey's voice was filled with a kind of vulnerability that made him seem almost childlike, stripped of the hardened exterior that he had worn for so long. Desmond took a deep breath, choosing his words carefully. "Because I knew that if I walked away, I'd be letting hate control me. I'd be giving into the same kind of anger that people like you have held on to for so long. And I refuse to be defined by that. Ramsey nodded, his expression thoughtful. I wish I could be like that. Strong enough to let go of the things that hold me back. Desmond looked at him, his face softening just slightly. Strength isn't about letting go, Ramsey. It's about facing the things that scare you, the things that challenge who you think you are. You're just starting that journey. It's not going to be easy. Ramsey managed a small, shaky smile, a glimpse of something lighter breaking through the darkness. Thank you, Desmond. For saying that. Desmond simply nodded, turning to leave, but his heart felt lighter, as though some of the weight he had carried for so long had finally begun to lift. As he walked away, he thought about Jaden, about the future he was building for him, and felt a renewed sense of purpose. He didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in a long time, he felt a sense of peace, a hope that maybe, just maybe, things could change. The days following that encounter in Patterson Park were strange and heavy for Desmond. He found himself replaying his conversation with Ramsey over and over, dissecting every word, every glance, every hint of emotion that had crossed the officer's face. There was something unsettling about it all. Desmond had spent so much of his life defining men like Ramsey as the embodiment of everything wrong in his world, as people to resist, to hold accountable. But now, Ramsey was a man grappling with his own moral reckoning, searching for a way to unmake the damage he had caused. Desmond hadn't given him forgiveness, hadn't tried to make the path easy, but he had offered something else, a challenge. He told himself that it was Ramsey's journey to undertake, that he would do well to keep his distance and let the man face his own battles. But somehow, the thought nagged at him. Could someone so hardened, so entrenched in his views, truly change? Or was Desmond setting himself up for more disappointment, getting drawn into a drama that had nothing to do with him? His friends at the garage noticed a difference in him. They knew about the incident with Ramsey, word traveled fast in the neighborhood, and people had opinions, strong ones. Most thought Desmond was a fool for having saved Ramsey, let alone listening to him afterwards. One afternoon, his coworker and friend, Marcus, cornered him in the break room, his expression one of frustration mixed with concern. Desmond, you've been different since that day, he began, crossing his arms. You're not seriously thinking about helping that guy, are you? Desmond looked at Marcus, a hint of defensiveness in his eyes. I'm not helping him, Marcus. He's got to deal with his own problems. I don't know. Maybe I saw something in him. Maybe he's not as hopeless as I thought. Marcus shook his head, his voice tense with anger. I don't get you, man. After everything he's done to you, to all of us, you're willing to even consider the idea that he could change. Desmond, that guy represents everything we've been fighting against. Desmond sighed, struggling to put his complicated feelings into words. Look, I know it sounds crazy. Maybe it is. But what's the point of all this, of all the things we talk about, all the things we're fighting for, if we don't believe that change is possible? I'm not saying it'll be easy, and I'm not saying I trust him. But I can't ignore what I saw in his eyes. The regret, the shame, it was real. Marcus clenched his jaw, his face darkening with frustration. Real or not, regret doesn't fix the past. It doesn't change what he did to you or the damage he's done to others. You can't save everyone, Desmond. Sometimes people don't want to be saved. Desmond met his friend's gaze, his own expression conflicted. I'm not trying to save him, Marcus. I'm just letting him figure it out on his own. Maybe he'll prove us all wrong. Or maybe he won't. But I can't carry this anger forever. I don't want Jaden to grow up seeing me filled with hate. Marcus softened slightly, nodding, though his eyes still held a wary skepticism. I get that, man. I do. But just, be careful. People like Ramsey don't change overnight. Don't let him drag you down in the process. Desmond nodded, appreciating his friend's concern. He knew Marcus was only looking out for him, but something inside him felt restless, caught between the anger he had carried for so long and a strange desire to believe in something more, something that might lead to healing, not just for himself, but for the community that had suffered under men like Ramsey. Days turned into weeks, and the impact of their encounter in the park seemed to ripple outward in unexpected ways. Desmond began to notice subtle shifts in his interactions around town. People he barely knew would nod at him, acknowledging his presence with a newfound respect. Some praised him for his bravery, for saving Ramsey's life despite the pain he had endured. Others were more critical, questioning his choice, seeing it as a weakness or a betrayal. But Desmond tried not to let it affect him. He focused on his work, on Jaden, and on the future he was trying to build. Then, one morning, as he walked Jaden to school, he spotted Ramsey standing near the entrance, talking to a group of kids, including Jaden. Desmond's pulse quickened, an instinctive protectiveness flaring up. He approached slowly, trying to read the scene, to gauge Ramsey's intentions. As he got closer, he heard Ramsey speaking, his tone unusually soft, his words carefully measured. "And I know that sometimes people like me, police officers, we don't always do the right thing. We make mistakes, big ones. But I'm here to learn, to listen, and to understand what I didn't before." Jaden glanced over at his father, his face lighting up as he saw Desmond approach. "Dad. Officer Ramsey was just telling us that he wants to make things right," Jaden said, his eyes wide with curiosity. "He said he wants to understand what he did wrong." Desmond's gaze shifted to Ramsey, his face carefully neutral. "Is that so?" he asked, his tone flat but polite, giving nothing away. Ramsey nodded, his expression serious. "I've been talking to the principal here, trying to set up a community group for kids, to teach them about understanding, about the mistakes I made and how they can avoid making the same ones. I don't know if it'll make a difference, but I have to try." Desmond's mind whirled. The idea was unexpected, even bold, but he couldn't help wondering if it was genuine or simply another attempt by Ramsey to salvage his reputation. Yet, seeing Ramsey in this setting, talking to the children with an openness he had never displayed before, Desmond felt a faint glimmer of possibility. Jaden looked up at him, his eyes shining with innocence and curiosity. "Dad, do you think he means it?" Desmond knelt down, placing a hand on his son's shoulder. He looked into Jaden's eyes, feeling the weight of the moment, knowing that his answer would shape how his son viewed the world. "I don't know, Jaden," he said softly, his voice laced with honesty. "But sometimes, people do change. And if they're willing to do the hard work, we have to at least give them the chance to show it." Ramsey looked at him, a flicker of gratitude passing over his face, but he said nothing, as if sensing that words would only dilute the sincerity of the moment. The days passed, and Ramsey's efforts in the community became the talk of the neighborhood. People were divided, some were willing to give him a chance, cautiously optimistic, while others remained skeptical, believing that a few gestures couldn't erase years of harm. Desmond watched from a distance, trying to remain impartial, but he couldn't ignore the signs of real change in Ramsey's actions. One evening, Desmond received an invitation to a community event at the school, where Ramsey would be speaking to the parents and children. Desmond hesitated, feeling a strange mix of curiosity and trepidation. He wasn't sure if he was ready to hear Ramsey's story, to see him in a light that might further blur the lines between them. But Jaden, sensing his father's hesitation, tugged at his hand, his face filled with excitement. "Come on, Dad. I want to hear what he has to say. Maybe he's really different now." Desmond smiled down at his son, feeling a swell of pride at Jaden's openness, his willingness to see the best in people. "All right, Jaden," he said, ruffling his son's hair. "Let's go." The event was held in the school's auditorium, and the room was packed with parents, children, and teachers. Desmond felt the weight of anticipation in the air, the collective curiosity and skepticism that filled the space. As they took their seats, he noticed Ramsey standing at the front, looking nervous, his eyes scanning the crowd as if searching for something or someone. When Ramsey began speaking, his voice was low, almost hesitant, as if he was choosing each word with care. He talked about his past, about the prejudices he had inherited from his father, about the years he had spent enforcing those beliefs without question. He didn't try to excuse his actions, didn't ask for sympathy. Instead, he focused on the damage he had caused, on the people he had hurt, on the guilt that now consumed him. "I used to think strength was about power, about control," Ramsey said, his voice wavering slightly. "But I was wrong. Strength is about admitting your mistakes, about facing the people you've wronged and asking for their forgiveness, even if you know you don't deserve it." Desmond felt a strange tightness in his chest as he listened, his mind flashing back to their encounters, to the pain and anger that had once defined his feelings toward Ramsey. He glanced at Jaden, who was watching intently, his young face filled with a mixture of wonder and understanding. As Ramsey continued speaking, Desmond noticed a shift in the crowd. People were listening, truly listening, their expressions softening, their skepticism melting away, replaced by a cautious hope. And for the first time, Desmond felt a sense of peace, a release from the anger that had held him captive for so long. When Ramsey finished, the room erupted in applause, hesitant at first, but gradually building into a roar of support. Desmond felt Jaden's hand slip into his, squeezing tightly, a silent gesture of encouragement. As they left the event, Ramsey approached them, his face filled with gratitude and relief. "Thank you, Desmond," he said quietly. "I couldn't have done this without you. You showed me what it means to be truly strong." Desmond looked at him, a small, genuine smile breaking through his usual guarded expression. "It's not about me, Ramsey. This is your journey. Just, don't let us down." Ramsey nodded, his face solemn, his eyes filled with a newfound determination. "I won't. I promise." As they walked away, Desmond felt a profound sense of closure, a feeling that, somehow, things had come full circle. He knew there would still be challenges, still be moments of doubt and hardship, but he felt a quiet hope that, for the first time, they were all moving towards something better. And as he held Jaden's hand, he realized that maybe, just maybe, he had given his son a gift more valuable than anything else, a chance to see that even in the face of hate, compassion and courage could light the way forward. In the months that followed the community event, Desmond found himself witnessing changes he once would have thought impossible. Ramsey stayed true to his word, immersing himself in the local projects, building relationships with people he had once looked at with distrust or contempt. People were slow to accept him at first, years of tension and mistreatment don't dissolve overnight. But Ramsey was patient, showing up day after day, listening more than he spoke, working harder than anyone to earn the trust he had lost. One winter afternoon, Desmond walked through the neighborhood with Jaden, heading to the community center where Ramsey had started hosting after-school programs. Jaden was eager to join the activities, excited to learn more about teamwork and respect. It was a strange feeling for Desmond, watching his son run to a place organized by the man who had once caused him so much pain. But he knew he was seeing something special, a shift, not just in Ramsey but in the entire community. People who had once been wary of each other were now working side by side, inspired by the effort they saw in Ramsey, even if they weren't ready to fully embrace him yet. As Desmond entered the community center, he was greeted by a few familiar faces, friends and neighbors who had come to support the children's event Ramsey had organized. It was a humble gathering, with some games and snacks laid out, but the kids were thrilled. Desmond watched as Ramsey moved among the kids, showing them exercises, teaching them to communicate, to respect each other. His face was open and animated, the cold, hardened expression that had once defined him replaced by something more genuine. Desmond was surprised to feel a sense of pride. It was something he hadn't expected, and for a moment, he wondered if he was foolish to feel it. But then he realized that this wasn't just about Ramsey, it was about the community they were building, the future they were creating for children like Jaden. During a break in the activities, Ramsey approached Desmond, his face lighting up with a hint of the awkward smile he'd developed over the past few months. "Hey, Desmond," he said, his tone softer than usual. I wanted to say thank you. Really. I wouldn't be here without you." Desmond nodded, a faint smile crossing his face. "You've put in the work, Ramsey. I'm glad to see it paying off. But remember, this isn't just about one day or one event. You've got to keep showing up. The community has been hurt deeply, and trust is fragile." Ramsey nodded, his gaze steady, his face filled with a calm determination. "I know. I'm in this for the long haul. Whatever it takes." Desmond felt a strange peace settle over him, a feeling that had been building ever since their encounter in the park but had only now reached full bloom. He saw, truly saw, the man that Ramsey was becoming, a man dedicated to making amends, to doing good. Desmond knew it would take time, but for the first time, he felt certain that this change was real, that Ramsey's transformation wasn't just for show. As the kids gathered for a group photo, Desmond felt Jayden tugging at his sleeve, beaming up at him. "Dad, can we come back here every week?" Jayden asked, his eyes shining with excitement. Desmond chuckled, his heart swelling with pride and a deep sense of hope. "Yes, son," he said, ruffling Jayden's hair. "We'll come back as often as you like." That evening, as Desmond and Jayden walked home, he thought about how far they had come, how much the neighborhood had changed since the day of the accident. He realized that what had begun as a moment of confrontation, a split-second decision to save a life, had sparked something far greater than he could have anticipated. It had forced a community to confront its own divisions, to consider the possibility of healing, even in the most unexpected places. In the following years, Ramsey became a true leader in the community, working tirelessly to bridge gaps and build trust. People began to trust him, slowly, carefully, but genuinely. He continued to run programs for the youth, started mentoring young adults, and even collaborated with Desmond on initiatives to bring more resources into the neighborhood. What had once seemed unthinkable was now their reality. They were allies, working side by side for a better future. For Desmond, the impact was more profound than he could have imagined. The pain, the resentment he had carried for so long, began to dissolve, replaced by a sense of purpose and pride. He saw the way his actions had shaped not just Ramsey, but the entire community. It was a kind of redemption he hadn't sought but that had found him anyway, a fulfillment of his grandmother's teachings, her belief in kindness and resilience. One day, as they wrapped up a community meeting, Ramsey approached Desmond, his face thoughtful. "I still think about that day, you know. The accident. How you didn't leave me behind." His voice was quiet, his tone reverent. Desmond met his gaze, a slight smile touching his lips. "Sometimes, life gives us choices we don't expect. It's what we do with them that matters." Ramsey nodded, his expression filled with gratitude. "You taught me that, Desmond. I owe you, more than I can say." Desmond simply nodded, feeling no need to dwell on the past. They had moved beyond it, transformed it, and in doing so, they had redefined what was possible. For the first time in his life, Desmond felt a sense of peace, a closure he had never thought he would find. In this story, we saw a journey of transformation, a man overcoming hate, and another finding the strength to forgive, not for the other person's sake, but for his own peace, his own freedom. It's a story about choices, about the power each of us has to shape our world through small acts of courage and compassion. We're often faced with moments that challenge us, moments that force us to confront the pain and prejudice around us. And sometimes, just sometimes, those moments give us the chance to redefine who we are, to build bridges where there were once only walls. Ask yourself, if you were in Desmond's shoes, would you have made the same choice? Would you be able to find it within yourself to show compassion, even to someone who had hurt you deeply? And for those of us who may find ourselves in Ramsey's place, are we willing to confront our own biases, our own wrongs, and work to make things right? Let us know in the comments how this story impacted you. Have you experienced a moment of unexpected forgiveness, or seen someone transform in a way that surprised you? We'd love to hear your thoughts. Thank you for joining us on this journey. If you enjoyed this story and want more tales that explore the complexities of human nature, forgiveness, and redemption, make sure to subscribe to Tales of Twist. And don't forget to hit the like button if this story resonated with you.